This is Evelyn Brooks, and tonight I'm going to tell you about Margaret Chen, a name you've never heard, a story that should have been told decades ago, because sometimes the silence speaks louder than any scream. Margaret Chen was 24 years old when she walked into KPFX radio station in San Francisco on a rainy November morning in 1972. She carried a brown leather satchel, a thermos of jasmine tea, and a secret that would change everything. She wasn't supposed to be there. Women like Margaret, Chinese-American, soft-spoken, daughter of immigrants who ran a laundromat in Chinatown, they didn't become radio producers. They didn't walk into rooms full of men who smoked cigars and talked over each other about Nixon and Vietnam and the World Series. But Margaret did. I remember the day she arrived because I was there. I was 28 then, working as a junior sound engineer, one of only 3 women in the entire building. I saw her standing in the lobby, water dripping from her navy blue coat, her black hair pulled back so tight it made her cheekbones sharp as glass. She looked terrified, but she didn't leave. You have to understand something about 1972. The war was still raging. The country was tearing itself apart. And in San Francisco, in that radio station, we thought we were part of the solution. We thought our voices mattered. Margaret's job was simple. Assist the lead producer, Martin Holloway, with his nightly talk show, Voice of the Bay. It was the most popular program in Northern California. 3 hours of unfiltered conversation, live calls, political debates. Martin was a giant in the industry. 52 years old, silver-haired, chain smoker, bourbon drinker. He had a voice like gravel and honey, and people trusted him. Margaret's first week was quiet. She fetched coffee, screened calls, organized scripts. She spoke only when spoken to. The other men in the office barely noticed her, but I did. I noticed how her hands trembled when Martin raised his voice. I noticed how she flinched when he slammed doors. I noticed the way she stayed late, long after everyone else had gone home, sitting alone in the production booth with headphones on, listening to old recordings. One night, around 9 p.m., I walked past the booth and saw her crying. I knocked on the glass. She looked up, startled, quickly wiping her face. "You okay?" I asked through the intercom. She nodded, but her eyes said something else. I should have pushed harder. I should have asked more questions. But back then, we didn't talk about things like that. We didn't ask women why they cried alone at night. We just looked away. 3 weeks later, Margaret came to me with a tape. It was a Thursday afternoon, late October. The station was mostly empty. She found me in the equipment room, cataloging reels. "Evelyn," she said quietly, "I need you to listen to something." Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. She handed me a reel marked, Voice of the Bay, October 14th, 1972. "What is this?" I asked. "Just listen," she said, "and please don't tell anyone." I took the tape to a back room and threaded it onto the player, put on the headphones, pressed play. At first, it was just the show. Martin's voice, smooth and confident, talking about the upcoming election. Then a commercial break. Then silence. But not empty silence. Someone was still recording. I heard rustling, papers, a chair creaking. Then Martin's voice again, but different, rough, angry. "You think you can just waltz in here and change things? You think anyone cares what you have to say?" A pause. Then Margaret's voice, small and shaking. "I just thought, you thought wrong. You don't think. You do what I tell you. Got it?" Another pause. "Got it?" "Yes." "Good. Now get out." The tape ended. I sat there for 10 minutes, just staring at the machine, because I knew what this was. I knew what it meant, and I knew what would happen if anyone found out. I found Margaret in the break room, staring at a cup of cold tea. "How many times?" I asked. She didn't look up. "Almost every night." "Why are you still here?" "Because I need this job. Because my parents spent everything they had to put me through college. Because if I quit now, I'll never work in radio again. Because Martin will make sure of it." I sat down across from her. "What do you want to do?" She finally looked at me. Her eyes were dry now, hard. "I want to destroy him. And God help me, I said yes. But destroying someone like Martin Holloway wasn't simple. He had friends in every newsroom in California. He had connections at the FCC. He had lawyers. He had power. Margaret had one tape. We needed more. Over the next 2 weeks, Margaret recorded everything. Every insult, every threat, every moment Martin thought no one was listening. She hid microphones in the production booth. She kept the tape machine running during commercial breaks. She documented it all. And I helped her. I showed her which equipment to use, how to hide the recordings, how to make duplicates, how to stay invisible. We were careful, so careful, but not careful enough. On November 8, 1972, Martin cornered Margaret in the hallway after the show. I wasn't there, but she told me later. Told me how he grabbed her arm, how he pushed her against the wall, how he leaned in close, bourbon on his breath, and said, "I know what you're doing. And if you don't stop, I will ruin you. I will make sure you never work again. I will tell everyone you're crazy, that you're lying, that you're just another bitter woman who couldn't handle the pressure." Margaret looked him in the eye and said, "I already have everything I need." Martin laughed. "You think anyone will believe you? You're nobody." She didn't answer. She just walked away. That was the last time anyone saw Margaret Chen alive. Wait, don't miss this detail. She didn't die. Not the way you might think. But the Margaret who walked out of that building on November 8th was not the same woman who walked in 3 months earlier. Because 2 days later, every major newspaper in California received an anonymous package. Inside were copies of the tapes, transcripts, dates, times, everything. The headline in the San Francisco Chronicle read, "Voice of the Bay host accused of harassment and abuse." Martin Holloway was fired within a week. His show was canceled. His reputation was destroyed. And Margaret Chen disappeared. I tried to find her. For months, I called her apartment. I went to her parents' laundromat. They wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't even look at me. I asked around the station, but no one knew where she went. Or if they did, they weren't saying. But the most shocking part was yet to come. In January 1973, I received a letter. No return address, postmarked from Seattle. Inside, just a few handwritten lines. "Dear Evelyn, thank you for believing me. Thank you for helping me find my voice. I'm starting over somewhere new, a place where no one knows my name, where I can be someone else. Don't look for me. Don't worry about me. I'm free now. M." I folded that letter and put it in my desk drawer, and I didn't tell anyone about it for 30 years, because Margaret was right. She was free, and sometimes freedom means disappearing. But here's what I learned later, what I pieced together over the years. Margaret didn't just disappear. She reinvented herself. In 1974, a woman named Margaret Chen started working at a community radio station in Portland, Oregon. She produced a show called Voices Unheard, a program dedicated to amplifying the stories of immigrants, women, and marginalized communities. The show ran for 15 years. Margaret Chen never did interviews, never appeared in photographs, never sought recognition. But everyone who worked with her said the same thing. She was kind. She was brilliant. She listened like no one else could. And she had this habit of drinking jasmine tea from a thermos. I didn't know for sure it was her. Not until 1989. That's when I received another letter. Same handwriting. Postmarked from Vancouver. Inside was a newspaper. Clipping. An article about Margaret Chen retiring from radio after 15 years of groundbreaking work. And underneath, just one sentence. "Thank you for teaching me how to use my voice." I kept that clipping. I keep it still, pressed between the pages of an old address book. Because Margaret Chen taught me something too. She taught me that courage doesn't always look like standing your ground. Sometimes it looks like walking away. Sometimes it looks like starting over. Sometimes it looks like becoming someone new so you can finally be yourself. But that's not the end of the story. In 2003, 30 years after Margaret disappeared, I received a phone call. It was late at night. I was alone in my apartment, going through old recordings for this very program you're listening to now. The voice on the other end was older, softer, but unmistakable. "Evelyn, is this still you?" My heart stopped. "Margaret?" A pause, then a laugh. Warm. Real. "I haven't been Margaret in a long time." "Where are you?" I asked. "Does it matter?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to know everything. But instead, I just said, "I'm glad you called." Another pause. "I wanted you to know something," she said. "I wanted you to know that what we did mattered. That tape, those recordings, they didn't just take down Martin. They started something. Other women came forward. Other stations changed their policies. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fast. But it mattered." "I know," I said. "Do you?" I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, I didn't know. Not really. I had spent so many years wondering if we had done the right thing, if the cost had been too high, if Margaret's freedom had been worth her erasure. But then she said something I'll never forget. "Evelyn, I didn't lose myself when I left. I found myself, and I've spent the last 30 years helping other people find themselves too. So yes, it mattered." We talked for 2 hours that night. About everything. About nothing. About the life she had built under a different name. About the people she had helped. About the women who had reached out to her over the years, thanking her for being brave. And at the end of the call, she said one more thing. "If you ever tell my story, don't make me a victim. Don't make me a hero. Just tell the truth. Tell them I was scared. Tell them I was angry. Tell them I was human. And tell them I survived." So that's what I'm doing now. I'm telling you about Margaret Chen, a woman who walked into a radio station in 1972 with nothing but a dream and a thermos of tea. A woman who faced something no one should have to face. A woman who fought back. A woman who disappeared. A woman who survived. And I'm telling you this because her story isn't unique. It's happening right now. In offices, in studios, in workplaces all over the world. Women are being silenced. Women are being threatened. Women are being told they're nobody. But they're not nobody. They're Margaret Chen. And if you listen closely, you can hear them. You can hear their voices, rising through the static, breaking through the silence, demanding to be heard. That's what this program is about. That's what Echoes of 1970 has always been about. Giving voice to the people history tried to forget. I never heard from Margaret again after that phone call. I don't know if she's still alive. I don't know if she's still out there, helping people find their voices, but I like to think she is. I like to think she's somewhere right now, sipping jasmine tea, listening to someone's story, and saying the words I wish someone had said to her all those years ago. "I believe you. Your voice matters. Don't let them silence you." But wait, there's something else I need to tell you. Something I've never told anyone before. Because Margaret Chen's story didn't just end with that phone call in 2003. It continued. In ways I never expected. In ways that still haunt me today. Let me take you back to 1972 for a moment. Back to those weeks when Margaret and I were collecting evidence against Martin Holloway. Because there's a part of that story I haven't told you yet. There was a third person who knew what we were doing. His name was Robert Zhang. He was the station's night janitor, 58 years old, immigrant from Taiwan. He barely spoke English, but he understood everything. Robert had worked at KPFX for 12 years. He cleaned the floors, emptied the trash, fixed broken equipment. Most people at the station didn't even know his name. They just called him the janitor. But Margaret knew him. She knew him because Robert was friends with her father. They went to the same community center in Chinatown. They played mahjong together on Sunday afternoons. They shared stories about the old country, about leaving everything behind, about trying to build something new in a place that didn't always want them. Robert had watched Margaret grow up. He had seen her graduate from college. He had been there the day she got the job at KPFX, standing in the back of the laundromat, while Margaret's parents cried with pride, and he had also seen what Martin Holloway was doing to her. One night, about a week after Margaret gave me that first tape, Robert found me in the equipment room. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there in the doorway, mop in hand, looking at me with these dark, tired eyes. Then he said, in careful, deliberate English, "You help Margaret. This is good." I froze. "How did you know?" He smiled. Sad, knowing. I clean offices, I empty trash. People think I don't see. But I see everything. He walked into the room and closed the door behind him. "Martin Holloway," he said. "Bad man. Very bad man. He hurt Margaret. He hurt other women too. Before Margaret." "What do you mean?" I asked. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handed it to me. It was a list. 6 names. All women. All former employees of KPFX. "These women," Robert said. "They work here before. They leave. Martin make them leave." "How do you know?" "I hear things. I see things. Late night, after show, when everyone go home. I clean Martin's office. I see papers. I hear phone calls. He threatened them. He scare them. They leave. They never come back." I stared at the list. My hands were shaking. "Where are these women now?" I asked. Robert shook his head. "I don't know. But maybe you find them. Maybe they help Margaret." And that's exactly what we did. Over the next week, Margaret and I tracked down every woman on that list. It wasn't easy. Some had moved out of state. Some had changed their names. Some didn't want to talk. But 3 of them did. Their names were Linda Morrison, Susan Park, and Diane Foster. Linda had worked at KPFX in 1968. She was a copywriter. Martin had cornered her in the break room one night, told her she'd never advance in the industry if she didn't cooperate with him. When she refused, he fired her the next day, told everyone she was unreliable. She never worked in radio again. Susan had been a production assistant in 1970. Martin had made inappropriate comments about her appearance for months. When she finally complained to HR, they told her she was overreacting. She quit a week later. Diane had been a sound engineer in 1971. Martin had grabbed her during a live broadcast, said it was an accident. It wasn't. She filed a report. The report disappeared. She left the industry entirely. When Margaret and I sat down with these women, when we played them the tapes we had collected, something shifted in the room. It wasn't just Margaret's story anymore. It was all of their stories. Linda looked at me and said, "I thought I was the only one." Susan said, "I thought no one would believe me." Diane said, "I thought I was crazy." And Margaret, sitting there with tears streaming down her face, said, "You weren't. None of you were." That's when everything changed. Because when those packages went out to the newspapers in November 1972, they didn't just contain Margaret's tapes. They contained testimonies from Linda, Susan, and Diane. They contained documentation of a pattern of abuse that had gone on for years. They contained evidence that the station had known and done nothing. The story wasn't just about Martin Holloway anymore. It was about the entire system that protected him. Within 2 weeks, KPFX's general manager resigned. The head of HR was fired. The station implemented new policies for reporting harassment. They hired an independent investigator to review all past complaints. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't justice. But it was something. And it started with a young woman who refused to stay silent and a janitor who saw everything. Robert Zhang never got recognition for what he did. He never wanted it. He just kept cleaning floors, emptying trash, fixing broken equipment. But Margaret never forgot him. In that letter I received from Seattle in 1973, there was a PS at the bottom. "Tell Robert thank you. Tell him I couldn't have done it without him." I went to find Robert the next day. Went to the station, asked for him. They told me he had quit. No notice. Just didn't show up one day. I went to Chinatown, to the community center where he played mahjong. They told me he had moved, back to Taiwan, to be with family. I never saw him again. But I think about him often. About how many people like Robert there are in the world. People who see everything. People who hold power not because of their titles or their status, but because they choose to stand up when it matters. People who understand that silence is complicity. And that's the thing about Margaret Chen's story. It wasn't just her story. It was Robert's story. It was Linda's story, Susan's story, Diane's story. It was my story. It was the story of everyone who had ever been told they were nobody and chose to believe otherwise. Now, let me tell you what happened next, because the story doesn't end in 1973. It doesn't even end in 2003. It ends in 2019. That's when I received an email. Subject line: "You don't know me, but you knew my mother." I opened it. "Dear Ms. Brooks, my name is Sarah Chen. My mother's name was Margaret Chen, though you may have known her as Mary Cheng. She passed away last month. Before she died, she asked me to reach out to you. She wanted you to know something." I stopped reading, closed my laptop, sat there in silence for what felt like hours. Margaret was gone. When I finally opened the email again, I read the rest. My mother spent her entire life helping people find their voices. She worked in community radio, in women's shelters, in immigrant advocacy organizations. She never sought recognition. She never told her story publicly, but she told me. She told me everything. She told me about Martin Holloway, about the tapes, about you, about Robert Zhang, about Linda and Susan and Diane, about the day she walked away from KPFX and never looked back. And she told me why. She said she didn't want to be defined by what happened to her. She didn't want to be the woman who was harassed. She wanted to be the woman who helped others. She wanted her legacy to be about what she built, not what was taken from her. But before she died, she said something else. She said it was time for her story to be told, not as a tragedy, not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to what's possible when people refuse to accept injustice. She said, "You would know how to tell it." Attached to the email was a photograph. It was Margaret, or Mary, or whoever she had become in the years after she left San Francisco. She was older, gray-haired, wearing glasses. She was standing in front of a radio station, holding a microphone, surrounded by a group of young women. All of them were smiling. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "Voices Unheard, 1985. I printed that photograph. I framed it. I put it on my desk, right next to the newspaper clipping from 1989. And I made a promise. I promised that I would tell Margaret's story. The whole story. Not just the parts that were easy to tell. Not just the parts that made her look strong, or brave, or heroic. I would tell the parts where she was scared, where she cried alone in production booths, where she wondered if it was worth it, where she thought about giving up, because that's the truth about courage. It's not the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. Margaret Chen was 24 years old when she walked into KPFX radio station in 1972. She was 54 when she retired from Voices Unheard in 2002. She was 70 when she died in 2019. She spent 46 years using her voice to amplify others, and now, I'm using mine to amplify hers. But there's one more thing I need to tell you. One more piece of the story. In 2020, 1 year after Margaret died, I received another email. This one was from Linda Morrison. Linda, if you remember, was the copywriter who had been fired by Martin Holloway in 1968. "Evelyn," she wrote, "I heard about Margaret's passing. I wanted to reach out, to thank you, to thank her, to tell you what happened after 1972. After the story broke, after Martin was fired, I thought my life would change. I thought doors would open. I thought people would finally believe me, but they didn't. I was blacklisted. People said I was a troublemaker. They said I was vindictive. They said I was trying to ruin a man's career. I couldn't get work. I left radio. I left California. I started over in a small town in Oregon, doing office work, keeping my head down, trying to forget. And then, in 1975, I got a phone call from a woman named Mary Cheng. She said she was starting a community radio program in Portland. She said she was looking for writers. She said she had heard my story and wanted to give me a chance. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know she was Margaret, but I took the job. And for the next 10 years, I worked with her. I wrote scripts. I told stories. I found my voice again. It wasn't until 1985 that she told me the truth, that she was Margaret Chen, that she had been through the same thing I had, that she understood, and she said something I'll never forget. She said, "Linda, what happened to us doesn't define us. What we do next does." I've thought about that every day for the past 35 years, and I wanted you to know that Margaret didn't just save herself. She saved me too. I sat at my desk, reading Linda's email, tears streaming down my face, because that's the thing about Margaret Chen. She didn't just survive. She created a ripple effect. She touched lives in ways she probably never fully understood. Linda Morrison went on to become a successful playwright. Her work has been performed in theaters across the country. She writes about women, about power, about finding your voice in a world that tries to silence you. Susan Park became a lawyer. She specializes in employment discrimination cases. She's represented dozens of women in harassment lawsuits over the years. Diane Foster started her own sound engineering company. She hires and trains women in an industry that's still male-dominated. And me? I started this program, Echoes of 1970, a show dedicated to telling the stories of people who changed the world in quiet ways, people whose names you've never heard, people like Margaret Chen. So tonight, as I sit here in my studio, looking at that photograph of Margaret surrounded by young women, I want you to remember something. History isn't just made by presidents and generals and celebrities. It's made by people like Margaret Chen, people like Robert Jang, people like Linda Morrison and Susan Park and Diane Foster. It's made by people who see injustice and choose to act, people who risk everything to stand up for what's right, people who understand that silence is not an option. And it's made by people like you, because I know you're out there. I know some of you are listening to this right now, sitting in your car or your bedroom or your office, and you're thinking about your own Margaret Chen moment. Maybe you're the one being silenced. Maybe you're the one watching it happen. Maybe you're the one who has the power to change things. Whatever your role is, remember this. You have a choice. You can look away. You can stay silent. You can tell yourself it's not your problem. Or you can be like Margaret. You can collect the evidence. You can tell the truth. You can risk everything for what's right. It won't be easy. Margaret spent the rest of her life rebuilding under a different name. Linda was blacklisted. Susan had to fight for years to be taken seriously. Diane had to start from scratch. But they did it, and their lives mattered. Their voices mattered. Their courage mattered. And so does yours. This is Evelyn Brooks, and this has been the story of Margaret Chen, a woman whose name you've never heard, but whose voice changed everything. Thank you for listening. And to anyone out there who needs to hear this tonight, remember Margaret's words. You're not nobody. You never were. Good night. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.